At the beginning of a pandemic, I was talking to 400 or 500 CEOs, and I want them to ask a question. They said, "Greg, if in one sentence, could you describe what it is to like lead in times of difficulty?" Obviously, they were talking about a pandemic, but just a turnaround. And I said, leaders really need to absorb fear and exude hope.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, it is a true honor to have a titan of the business world, Greg Brenneman. Greg has been very influential for me over the past few years after I was introduced to him through our shared university, Washburn University. Not only has he provided some wise counsel to me, he also spoke at our Advisors Excel Leadership Summit this past year, and our advisors just loved having him there. But let me give you just a little background on Greg. First, probably the easiest way for me to describe him is he is a corporate turnaround savant. After a stint at Bain Capital, he was brought in as CEO and helped lead the turnaround at Continental Airlines in 1995. He's led a $3.5 billion sale of PwC Consulting to IBM, and then also led a turnaround at Burger King. Now he is the chairman of CCMP Capital, which is a private equity firm down in Houston with over $16 billion in buyout and growth equity transactions since 1984. But I would say more than all of that, he's an incredible man of faith, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that today, who has impacted so many other leaders. So I'm excited for you all to have him here today and be able to learn from him. So Greg, buddy, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you, Cody. It's always great to be with you. And it's not very often not very many people have heard of Washburn University. So the fact that we share that together and share a common faith and so many beliefs is a lot of fun for me. So thank you.
That's very true. Yeah.
What you've done for Topeka, especially.
Well, we're trying. Hopefully we're not done. So it's been you've been a great inspiration for some of those things. If you're good, let's jump into some questions, because I got a lot of stuff that I want to ask you. Some of the things that I haven't even got a chance to ask you personally that I want to dive into.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I want to start here because you do something that just fascinates me. One of the things that we talk to our advisors a lot about and really work on is helping them understand how important culture is as you build and scale an organization. And truth be told, I think when a lot of advisors come to us, they're really good advisors. They maybe haven't spent the time focusing on those other business owner things. So maybe their culture is not exactly what they want it to look like. And this is what you do that fascinates me. You've been able to walk into companies that aren't doing well, which I assume means their culture isn't great, and create these amazing turnarounds quickly. What do you do to change a culture when you walk into somewhere like Continental and take over? And then maybe what are some lessons that people could leverage from that to change their own culture if they're not happy with it?
Yeah, no, Cody, I really do believe culture is everything. I mean, it's so very important, and you really can't improve your business, whether it's performing okay, but kind of what I call satisfactorily underperforming and needs to just perform better, or whether it does need a pretty dramatic makeover. You really can't do that if you don't have the buy-in and the hearts and minds of the people. And so walking into those environments, it's pretty easy to see, particularly if companies are broken, that they culturally are broken as well. And that can manifest itself in a whole bunch of different ways. It can manifest itself, in outright hostility. And some of the times when I walked into, say, Burger King, the franchisees were, some of them were out picketing the front office when I got there, right? So obviously not going great. Or when you walk into an airline like Continental Airlines and you see just people either being frustrated or even worse, being apathetic, right? Like nothing's ever going to change. I actually enjoy it when they're frustrated and they have some passion, because, that's a little easier to rechannel than just outright apathy in a way. But I think the real key to changing culture is obviously treating people with dignity and respect. But then it's laying out a plan for them. Somebody asked me at the beginning of a pandemic, I was talking to 400 or 500 CEOs, and I want them to ask a question. They said, Greg, if in one sentence, could you describe what it is to like lead in times of difficulty? Obviously, they were talking about a pandemic, but just a turnaround. And I said, leaders really need to absorb fear and exude hope. So I think God just put that on my mind. I hadn't really thought about that question, but if you think about that concept of absorbing fear, generally when you're in a situation where there's not the right culture, people are blaming each other. They're not enjoying themselves. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it in how people carry themselves. You can see it in how they answer your questions, whether you're getting honest, kind of authentic feedback, or you're just getting a canned answer that people, think you want. And if you kind of can walk into that environment and absorb some of that fear and say, no, we're actually here to get better together. Here's kind of, as I look at the business, here are the things I see. I want to get educated by you on the way through and have you tell me what you see so I learn a little bit about what's happening. But then there's another piece to it that's exuding hope. And I always try and walk into a business with a plan, and it might not be 100% right out of the gate. I need the input from the management team often and the employees to get it, refine it. But I try and walk in with a plan and say, you know what, we're going to go east today, and east is 090 on the compass, and sort of here's kind of my analysis of the business and the potential, where we are today and the potential of where we could be. And I think if you can paint a picture for people of what you want that where we could be to look like, what's in your mind, what are your hopes and dreams, and very authentically share that, that tends to win people over, along the way. And then, I'd say the final thing is once you have a plan, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about developing a plan, but once you can lay out that hope for the future, then it's communication. And I used a ton of different ways along with the executives, I led, to communicate. At Continental, we'd once every quarter go to all the hub airports and hold big open houses to talk to people and lay out, here's the go forward plan and what we're going to execute. Here's where we are. And, here's kind of what we need everybody to be doing. And we'd take questions and just stand there and answer until all the questions were asked. Or every Friday, I used to go to the airport at Continental and go in the break rooms, the pilots, the mechanics, the flight attendants, the gate agents, and just spend a few hours talking to everybody and answering questions and hearing what they were doing. And then we also left a voicemail at the time. You could probably do this by video or email now. But in every company I've run, every Friday have put out a voicemail message that says, hey, here's our go forward plan. Here's where we're headed. And here's the progress we made this week. And here's what we're working on next week. And just be very consistent about that. And then in many of the companies where the employees were scattered all over the place, in their break rooms, we had actually put up bulletin boards, and we call it the Go Forward Bulletin Board. And we'd actually post and keep them updated every week, kind of what was going on at the company and what was going on in the industry. And so we were just looking for any possible way we could actually communicate the message to keep everybody to get everybody on the same page and then keep them on the same page. So, some of it is kind of walking in and developing that plan and being able to exude that hope. And then a lot of communication until you think you've told everybody and you realize you got to do it 50 more times, right? I mean, you never finish, so.
I think, that's one of the things when I read your book, one of the things that I think we've even tried to tweak is like, how consistently are we talking about just not how we're doing, but how we're doing in regards to the plan and the vision that we have for the organization, and just repeating that. I think I heard Patrick Lencioni say this, like, you should repeat it so often, like it becomes boring, and then repeat it some more after that.
No, and he says it exactly right. I used to say, I would just keep telling the same story. And I'd actually find myself daydreaming during when I was talking about it. And, that sounds bad, but I'd done it so much, but I realized that as bored as I was with it, I just had to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Because, at Continental, for example, we had 50,000 people spread all over the place. At Burger King, we had franchisees, in every country of the world practically. So you really did have to work hard at, communicating a message consistently and like you say, over and over and over until you get bored with it and then do it some more.
So I wasn't going to ask you this question, but you mentioned something there that I'd just love to get your opinion on. What do you do with the apathetic people? So, you said the frustrated people are great. You can rechannel that. How do you handle the apathetic people?
Generally, what happens is once you get a culture moving and people are excited, people want to win. So if you can kind of exude that hope, a lot of the apathy will actually take care of itself, by some of your employees talking to the apathetic people. So, ultimately, I'll give you an example. At Continental, we put in this on-time bonus, right? So every month we were number one in on time, as measured by the DOT. The employees got $100, and every month we were second and third. They got $65. So invariably, during the course of running an airline, you'll get to the point where you're doing union to get labor negotiations, and one of the famous tricks the pilots want to use is to slow down the airline, right? To go what they call by the book, right? Where they'll slow down the airline. Well, whenever the pilots wanted to, or anybody wanted to do something like that, I'm not picking on the pilots, but whenever anybody wanted to do something like that, the gate agents would get really upset because that $100 meant a lot to them. Mm-hmm. And so, they'd come up to, book their flight to fly home or go on vacation, and they'd find themselves in the middle seat of the back row of coach, right? Because the gate agent would say, you slowed me down. I missed my $100, and you're going to go to the back of the bus by the laboratory. So it kind of self-policed itself in a funny sort of way. Everybody was, pretty excited, and most of the time as the improvement happened. But you always will in any business, I think, have a set of people who are, not on the bus, if you will, but are apathetic. And what I find you have to do after you try to take them through it is you just have to have a sit down and have a conversation with them and say, hey, this isn't working for you, and it's really not working for us either. Let's get you to a place where you're really excited, right? So that may need to be in some other company. Maybe it's not here. And so just treating them with dignity and respect and exiting them is kind of the last resort, because you owe it to them to try and get them excited about it, but they kind of owe it to the company to be excited about the mission too. And if you're there and most everybody's there and 5% of the people can't get there, you're probably better off without them than you are with them.
Yep, that's good. So this whole concept fascinates me. I say one of the things, when we started Advisors Excel 16 years ago, there were three of us, and we've been able to intentionally build the culture the way that we want. So it just blows my mind a little that you can walk in. I say that's got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world, is to come in and change a culture. So just give me, what do the first 48 hours look like? Like, what are the most important things that you do right away in those first couple days?
Yeah, generally what I would do is actually initially kind of pull the management team in and let them know kind of what was expected of them. So maybe lay out a little bit of the vision for the business and kind of the observations from the outside and some of the things I wanted to talk to them about that we'd work on together as we developed the plan fully. And then also kind of really spend some time laying out the culture that we expected to have. And there were some attributes to that culture, like I don't like people being late for meetings, right? Because it kind of wastes everybody's time, kind of in the be here now. And so we'd put a box at the door to the meeting. And, the first couple meetings I did, at the airline when I took over, the meeting was supposed to start at 8:00. They were kind of used to wandering in late. I just locked the door. And we just did the meeting without folks. And the next day they were on time, right? I mean, it's and it's just treating everybody with respect because of their time. And then people would like fiddling around, in the Continental days, it was BlackBerries. Now it's iPhones, whatever technology you have. My kids used to call it a crackberry because the minute that red light would start blinking, some of you remember that, it would go. And so I actually put a box at the door. And when you came into the meeting, you just put your device into the box. And then we were going to have a meeting, and you could go answer your email after the meeting, and it would work fine. So there were some cultural expectations like that. And then we talked a lot about treating others with dignity and respect. So I said, we're not going to have any flame throwing emails. And if you see one, I want you to send it to me so I can call the person who sent it and talk to them about it. Because people love hiding behind email and kind of, poking at each other, in email. And, generally you have one conversation with somebody, they stop doing it. And if they don't, it seems like every company I'd have at least one public hanging, where I just terminate somebody for, continually violating that. And word gets around pretty quick and the culture starts to kind of shift, right? So you have to be ready to kind of do that. Now, I'll be honest with you, as we're leading, we do a lot of offsites with married couples and stuff, my wife and I, and we have 18 singles, high potential singles in Houston coming together this fall for 9 different dinners to cover some important life topics. One of the things that's become a very contentious thing during this whole time of the pandemic is just getting vaccinated, right? And so we've just basically said, hey, if you want to participate in that, you have to be vaccinated. You don't have to participate. I mean, it's a voluntary thing. We're asking you and paying for it. And it's not so much for you. I mean, you can make your own decision, but your decision affects a lot of people around you. So let's actually talk about how to treat those around you with dignity and respect.
That's good.
And from a good health thing. So I'm not a wildly crazy guy on all that, but it is important that we treat those around us. We think of people other than ourselves a little bit, and so we talk a lot about that kind of in kickstarting that.
Very cool. Okay, another question I want to ask you, and it kind of goes into this when you jump in. But one of the things, a lot of advisors is they're growing and scaling. One of the comments I hear from them a lot is like, man, I want to spend more time on laying out this vision for the business and planning, but so busy with, appointments and all the day-to-day of running it. I'm going to assume that when you walked into Continental or Burger King that there were quite a few things that needed to be addressed. So how did you go about balancing kind of this need to figure out what was going on, probably putting out a lot of fires, versus also developing and implementing new strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question, Cody. For me, there was so much going on in a companies of that size and scale that you could spend your entire life putting out every fires and there would always be another fire, right? So to me, to get organized and figure out what things do I really need to work on, what are the most important things, if I didn't step back and actually write a one-page plan, and so I always said market, financial, product, and people, and I'd actually give those some fun categories like Fly to Win was our market plan at Continental, Fund the Future was our financial plan, Make Reliability a Reality was the product plan, and the people plan was called Working Together. Every company I'd kind of do that. And then I always had a rule, you couldn't put any more than 4 or 5 things under each one of those, right? And they should be your blue chips. So in poker, there's red chips, white chips, and blue chips. And what I found a lot of those fires they're white chips, right? Yeah, do you need to do them? You do, but there's probably somebody else that can help you with that, or they're just not the most important things. So the only way I could figure out what are the most important things to work on was to step back, actually write that plan of where do I want to take the business, and then make sure I had a team, the right team to execute the plan. I couldn't do it all for sure, but you needed to have the right team around you to execute that plan. And if you just take and pause for that time to create that, it gets a lot easier, because then when the fires start coming up or the appointments come up, you can kind of say, where does that fit in what we're trying to accomplish? If it's really important, maybe I need to do it myself. If it's not that quite as important and I'm trying to mentor some people and bring them along, maybe I actually turn some of that stuff over to the team that I have, or make sure I have the right team to help me do that. And it becomes very clarifying for me. So, without that, it seems like life is just one long to-do list, right? But if you can have a to-do list with a purpose, it makes a big difference. And I think that's why you step back and take the time. By the way, it's not easy to do that. Everybody says, well, 1 page, that's not that hard. It's intensely hard because, most people like to, their idea of a strategy is a notebook about this thick, right, of stuff they need to do. And if you try and do that, you won't do anything very well, right? So getting prioritized to me was the whole benefit to actually being able to think about what fires do I really need to focus on.
That's great. Prioritizing those. So in your book, Right Away and All at Once, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and I would highly recommend everyone pick up, you talk a lot about the need for cash. And I think that was something that became very top of mind, last year during the pandemic. But what can companies do during the good times to make sure they have enough cash put aside for the stressful times? But then also, and this is something that you really hit on in there, but you don't carry so much cash that it's unproductive. How do you balance that to have enough but not too much?
Yeah, Cody, I think on that one, it kind of depends on the business, how much cash and how much credit you can need. We have some businesses we own that actually have very little CapEx, and they kick off an enormous amount of cash. And we'd be kind of crazy to keep a lot of excess cash around and not have a little bit of debt on the business. It wouldn't be efficient at all, right? We have other businesses that are more capital intensive and kind of need more cash. But I think it all ties back to your mission. So I'll tell you a story on the cash side around the time of the pandemic that might actually inform it. It's in a company everybody knows, the Home Depot, where I'm lead director. So we hit the pandemic in March of 2020, and I was talking to Craig Manier, the CEO of Home Depot, and we actually went back to the core values of the company. So we have a very clear set of core values the founders left us. Really at the top of that core value is an inverted pyramid for running the company. So it starts with the customers, and then it goes to our associates, the orange-blooded associates in the stores. And it goes all the way down to the CEO in an inverted pyramid, and then the board of directors isn't even on there. So that's how unimportant it is. And so we said, well, we've always taken care of our associates, whether it was during the financial crisis or at any time. So we asked the question, we didn't know if we'd be able to stay open. We didn't know if we were going to get closed down. So we said, what would it take to pay our associates for 60 days if we were closed, right? If we couldn't operate at all. And we'd have a little online running and a few things. We did that calculation. It was $11 billion to pay. Just for your own business, take like 6 zeros off of that. It'd be about
makes me feel better about our payroll
kind of thing. Yeah, it was $11 billion, and so we had $3 billion of cash on the balance sheet, and we had $5 billion of letters of credit we could issue. And so we called Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan, and we said, "Hey, Jamie, we need a $5 billion credit line to back up those letters of credit." And he said, "Fine." So we got that. So we had 8. And then the bond market was completely closed, right? You couldn't go to the financial markets. And so I looked at Craig and I said, "Craig, if Home Depot can't open the bond market, who can, right? I mean, it has to be, available. We ought to try." We did, actually. We went out and we, in a couple hours, the finance team did a great job. We had $27 billion worth of demand for $3 billion of bond need. So we ended up taking $5 billion at around 3% interest rate. And all of a sudden, we had 5 plus 3, $13 billion. And we protected the one cultural thing that was the single most important thing in the business, which was taking care of our associates. And we never did need to tap into that. So we ended up with excess cash. We ended up doing a M&A deal we'd wanted to do, not as a result, but to use some of that cash. And we generate somewhere around $20 billion of cash a year, so a lot. But we did protect our culture and protected the company. So I think when you sit down and you ask about how much cash do you need and then how to manage your balance sheet, you really go back to your core values and say, what is the most important thing we should protect? And making sure your kind of balance sheet maturities match your assets, and that you do have, plenty of cash that you can protect your company. But I'm not a big advocate of carrying a bunch of inefficient cash in excess of that. So it kind of depends on the business. In the advisory business, you might need a little capital for new products and things like that, and to spend on marketing and be able to serve your customers. But by and large, it's a pretty good cash flow business.
It is.
And so my guess is you can probably afford to have a little bit of debt and and some and had generate pretty good cash flow off of it. So that would be the way I would work through it. As I say, what am I really after protecting? Because the worst thing in the world is at the worst time to get jammed. You don't want to be in a position where the bank needs you. You want to be in a position where you need the bank. You want to be in a position where the bank needs you. So
that's good advice. With your background and seeing a lot of different businesses, some that have not gone so well that you've had to fix, are there any commonalities, kind of regardless of the industry, that you've seen that can almost predict the decline of a company?
Yeah, I think when people stray from their core, the joke was always, Cody, if somebody builds a new corporate headquarters, you want to short the stock, right? Because it is a joke, but that's kind of been the saying that's been around our business career. But I think when it's just a sign for when people kind of lose their focus on their customers and their employees, you can kind of see those businesses. Many businesses do that and do what I call satisfactorily underperform, right? So they don't ever hit the skids completely, but they're a fraction of what they could be. And there's many businesses out there like that. And I think the commonality to me is just losing track of who your customer is, and and what team you need to kind of execute on that. I was actually having lunch on Wednesday with a pastor who's very successfully led and grown a very large church here in Houston, and asked me to mentor him. And we were talking through his team, and he came to me and he said, "Greg, I got 2 members of my team that have been with me over 10 years, but they're really impediments to me going further." And he had sat down with his team and written a 1-page plan for the church, and actually backed up then and said, "What team do I need to execute that plan?" Right? And he actually then came back and said, I need to actually, in a very dignified way, actually have 2 people that have been with me a long time kind of move on because they don't fit where we need to go, what we're being called to do as a church going forward. So I don't think it's necessarily just business, but it is business, is sitting back and saying, where am I taking it? And then who do I have to help me get there? And businesses tend to actually, on a very common basis, lose focus of, where's their customer going? Where's, who do they have on the team to sort of make sure that they execute that plan to serve their customer? And that's generally where I see, things kind of fall apart.
Let me ask a little follow-up to that. Is there any consistent thing you see in the leader of the businesses where you can say, like, when I see this, I know they're in trouble?
Yeah, arrogance would probably be the number one thing, right? Or folks that actually are in, and I'm talking about probably bigger businesses now, but folks that are more into their own, career and the prestige around it, and and aren't humble, around it. We even went through a time like that at Home Depot. We had a CEO that was brought in, the first CEO after the founders, and it turned out he just had a very high opinion of himself. And we are a very humble company. I mean, the chief operating officer is a African American female that started as a part-time cashier and now has 450,000 people reporting to her, and she's fantastic. Wow. Right? So the humility that actually comes with running a business that serves other people is so critical, and that was just missing. It was also missing at Continental Airlines when we got there. Just the humility of not being able to do that. I think the 3 most unused words in the English language are "I don't know." And whenever a leader can't back up and say, "That's a good question, I don't really know the answer to that. Let me go think about that and talk to some people and get back to you," that to me is always a great sign, right? And when somebody's kind of unwilling to be humble, and not get caught up in that. I'm having dinner in a week with Frank Blake and Craig Meniere. Frank is now the chairman of Delta Airlines and Macy's, and was the chairman and CEO of Home Depot. And Craig Meniere is the current chairman and CEO of Home Depot. And the 3 of us go to dinner. This will be the first time since the pandemic, so I'm really looking forward to it. Those are the two most humble
Hmm.
leaders I've ever been around, and are two of the very best CEOs in all of America. But there's just a certain there's a certain value to that sort of humbleness
For
that
sure.
matters, right? That
I've seen
oh,
that. It
Servant
feels like,
leadership is kind of the term everybody uses to kind of
yep.
that. Yeah.
See that it feels like the advisors who continue to grow and scale, they're able to maintain that humility
Yeah.
also. So, okay, I want to talk some about your book, which
Sure.
there's going to be a lot of business lessons in here too. But I tell everyone, probably one of the most impactful books I've read over the past few years, and I'll probably share a few of the things I learned from that. But let me ask this question to start off. With your business background, I think people would pick it up assuming it's a business book, and it is. But there's also a roadmap for personal growth and development. So why was it important for you for it not just to be business, but to also incorporate the personal aspect into the book?
Yeah, it's a great question, Cody. After we did the Continental Airlines turnaround, the head of the Harvard Business Review, who ended up marrying Jack Welch, by the way, the guy that ran GE, Susie Wettlaufer, became Susie Welch. She asked me to write an article like how we saved Continental. What were the steps? How do you do it? Because she had known we had been together at Bain and Company as consultants,
Okay.
and at Harvard Business School, she was a classmate. And so we did, actually credit her. It was a great article because of her, because she was a much better writer than I was. But it became kind of a bestseller. So I got asked from the late '90s on to write a book essentially about how do you turn around a business, how do you think about it, and it never felt like a resume virtue. I did this, I did that, I wrote a book. Like who cares, right? And I never really been that excited about business books in general. I mean, there's some that are really great, but I hadn't been. So it just never was something I wanted to do. And then finally, a publisher came to me and they said, Greg, we'll let you actually have control over what you write. Because the normal book process is you prepare something, a bunch of 30 and 40-year-olds tell you what they think you ought to write, and then you kind of, write to that. It's like kind of a lousy process. And so I said, that's great. If I can have editorial control, I'm only going to do it if I can write a book that actually covers the 5 steps to turn around your company, essentially to improve your company, but also the 5 steps to enrich your life, the corollary steps on your life. And they said, well, why don't you write 2 books? Write one for business and one for life. And I said, you'll never publish the second one if I do that. So actually, the life chapters I think are even better than the business chapters.
Yeah.
But the 5 steps are really for business and life. And then that felt more like a eulogy virtue, right? Something that you could pass on. And I'll tell you, as I talk or as people read the book, I get probably 4 or 5 letters a week, on the book. And it's all the life stuff that people grab onto. I mean, the business stuff is good. I mean, I think there's a good framework there. But
Sure.
the life stuff is really what matters to all of us, right? We all want to live impactful life, and that's something that the book actually focused on. So every other chapter is business and life, and I think that keeps the book kind of more interesting, at least to me.
Would you mind? And obviously, we're not going to go into great detail on each of the 5 steps, right? That would make this like a 5-hour podcast. People can go buy the book. But would you just high level kind of walk through? Hey, here's the 5 steps. Here's like simple concept of how you apply it to business, and then here's the simple concept of how you apply it to your personal life.
Yeah, absolutely. So step 1 is have a plan and track your progress. And in business, I'll just give you a sense. In Continental, we wrote the 1-page plan, do it in every business. I already said market, financial, product, people. The market plan, was fly to win, as I mentioned. A quick example of that is I asked the question, why are we flying Greensboro to Greenville 8 times a day when both customers are on the first flight? And somebody would say that was strategic. And I'd say, well, when was the last time it made money? And they'd say it never did. I'd say, how strategic could that be? And couldn't we just charter a jet to get you and your girlfriend there? It'd be a lot cheaper. So, that's the kind of, have a plan, really lay it out. And then in life, it's actually truly it's focus on those things that matter. So I use a kind of a framework called the 5 Fs, and somebody just added a 6th F to it, which I thought was good. So it's faith, family, friends, fitness, finance. And then a friend of mine sent me a note, actually a kid that's going to be a clerk on the Supreme Court this year for John Roberts, this Supreme Court justice, wrote me and he said, Greg, you need to add fun to that. He'd read the book. Oh. And that was a good ad. But
that is, yeah.
If you take those Fs and you sort of think about what are the 2, 3, 4 things you want to do in your life, at least the next few years, to get closer to God. A.W. Tozer has a statement, God doesn't have favorites, but he does have intimates. A.W. Tozer is a theologian. So what do you do to become an intimate of God's, right? On your family, where do you want to invest in your parents and your kids? Where do you need to put that investment? I call those blue chips, they're the most important things. And so I have my plan and I just carry it with me. And that's an alliteration of how to use a plan in your life. It's a very powerful tool to use. And then the second step is build a fortress balance sheet, which we talked a little bit about. I stole that term from Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase, who managed through the financial crisis brilliantly by having a fortress balance sheet. On the life side, it's really, I call it choose freedom. And it basically, as you now have a plan for your life, you've written your plan, that you can use the 6 Fs or whatever framework you want, but you've written your plan on what's important. Make sure the financial piece of how you manage your money doesn't get, and this is what you guys help people do all the time, as the advisors do, is make sure your financial plan actually aligns with your life plan. Sounds simple, nobody does it, right? So they end up in financial trouble and they say, well, I can't really be fulfilled in my life because I can't do the things I wanted to do. Well, no kidding. I mean, you basically got yourself in trouble financially. So thank God for all of you guys that are out there helping people through that. In business, the third step is think money in, not money out. You can't cut your way to prosperity. How do you grow your business? And that's really true for advisors too, right? How do you actually think about growing your business, adding incremental value to your clients, making their life more fulfilling, making sure they can do what they want to do and do it in a thoughtful way. In life, it's exactly the opposite. It's think money out, not money in. And I know you and I both believe this because we partner together on some things, but it's generosity is the only cure for materialism, right? So how do you give back to others? And in step 4 in business, we've talked about a little bit too, it's build a team. And once you have your plan, you need to actually, with a blank sheet of paper, say, what kind of teammates do I need to execute this plan? Then look at who you have and figure out, can that team get you there? Or every business, no matter how good they're run, needs to make a few changes when they do that.
Sure.
Move people to the right places to get them on the A-task. And in life, it's surround yourself with a kind of life board of directors, essentially. It's basically put a team around you. And a really quick example of that we all know is if you've ever read the book Winnie the Pooh as a kid, there was a character in Winnie the Pooh called Eeyore, right? Who was a donkey who was always depressed and dragging people down and all that and never could get satisfied. We all have Eeyores in our life, right? And this doesn't work for your family, but it could work for anybody else. Sometimes you end up with an Eeyore you're spending a lot of time with, right? It's kind of dragging you down. It's probably dragging them down too. You don't need to lose them as a friend or somebody in your life. Just move them out of concentric circles so that you have those people you meet with every day, every month, every year. Just don't meet with them every day. Maybe you meet with them once a quarter. And it's a really good little tool if you find yourself, kind of getting drugged down, into that. Like I say, it doesn't work with your mother-in-law, but it works pretty much with everybody else. And then the last one is, I call it let the inmates run the asylum. And that's after you have a plan, you've thought about how to generate income, bring money out, you've got a good fortress balance sheet, you've got the right senior team. Basically, what you want to do is push as much responsibility down into the organization, as possible. And the life side of that is really invest in others. It's think of eulogy virtues, not resume virtues, and make sure you always have a Paul, somebody mentoring you, and a Timothy, somebody you're mentoring, to give back. So that's a super quick kind of overview of the 5 steps in business and life. But if you want to learn more, grab the book. It's a quick read, and each chapter takes like 15 minutes. So if you want to pick off the personal chapters, you can do that. If you want to pick off the business chapters, you can do that. They all stand alone.
Well, and hopefully everyone who listens to this goes and buys it, because it is, like I said, probably one of the best books I've read in a long, long time, and super impactful for me over the last few years. One of the things you talk about, and I want to hit this real quick and then move on to a few other things. You talk about the need to find all-star servant leaders, not just all-star leaders. And I know we've hit a little bit on servant leaders. Can you talk about the difference as people build out a leadership team, what you're really looking for and why that's so important?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I say there are really there's 2 tests to actually hiring a leader, y'all kind of high level this, and we could go into any detail you want. The first is an IQ dipstick test, and a lot of us used to check the oil in our cars, right? They're pretty automatic now, but there was a stick that came in and out, and you could pull it out, and it'd show you whether you're 1 quart empty, 2 quarts empty. You'd add some oil to your car. I try and do the same thing on just the capability of people, right? Like if you put the dipstick in and it comes out 2 quarts empty, it's probably not going to work. I don't care how good a team player they are. If they can't execute the task you need, you're not doing them a favor or yourself. But the other one's equally important, or maybe more important, and that I call the fly across the Atlantic test. Is this someone you'd want to sit next to for 8 or 10 hours as you flew across the Atlantic and have a good conversation? Are they someone that actually builds into people, that treats people with dignity and respect, that really leads in a manner where they want to see their team, be better and excel, more than they are? Are they somebody who actually picks people for their team that are better than they are at many tasks, right? And that's kind of what I would call more the first one. You need to be a leader, because if you don't have the raw material, it's probably not going to work in somebody. But that servant piece is just critically important, and it makes all the difference in the culture of your company.
Like, you're going to spend so much time with that person. If you don't really enjoy being around them, that's not gonna go well. So I think sometimes people, as they grow, they overlook that, right? They pay a little bit more attention to the resume versus just how good of a person is this going to be to work with, and am I going to enjoy, spending a lot of time around this person?
Yeah, I like actually when I'm talking to people, when they ask a lot of good questions, right? I'm sure you do too, and challenge me with a lot of good questions. And kind of when I'm looking to hire people and a dinner or something like that, it's much more interesting if there's questions going back and forth than it is, if it's a one-way exchange.
Okay, so I want to talk about a couple other things. Just, I think I've said you've really had a big influence on me over the past few years. And I think one of the reasons I was so drawn to you and what you were talking about is we have very similar backgrounds. We both grew up in small, rural Kansas towns. We both went to Washburn University. Now, you also did happen to go on to Harvard, so you have that on me. But we both have went on to have some success in business, but got a long way to catch you there also. But when you grew up in Heston, couple questions maybe, did you think you were going to go down this road of being a business executive early on? And then did you ever think you'd have the experiences that you have today?
Yeah, no, I'd say it would be pretty hard to anticipate having, like, for you too. I mean, did you ever think you'd actually start a business that, is as successful as it is? I think probably none of us, the answer to that is no. I was very blessed growing up. I grew up in a small, as you said, Kansas farm town. It was the big company in town was Heston, Kansas, and made farm equipment essentially. My great uncle was the inventor of the auger that takes grain from the combine to the wheat truck, and then the machine that makes the original hay bale. You used to have to take a pitchfork and pitch hay on the back of the wagon, and he did that. And then the machine that makes the big round bales and the big square bales. And he turned that into a Fortune 500 company. He was my first mentor. He taught himself how to fly, so he was also hanging around with the Cessna brothers and the Gates brothers down in Wichita that were Fred Koch of Koch Industries, kind of as that whole, and Frank Carney of Pizza Hut. There was a whole cadre of those guys that were kind of entrepreneurs at the same time, and so that was just a great way to kind of grow up. But what I kind of learned in that experience, I'm sure you did too, Cody, is how to treat people with dignity and respect. It was a small town. You were going to see the person a lot. Oh, 3,000 people, and you knew all of them. So your behavior and how you handled yourself and how you treated others was so critically important. And that was probably the first place I learned that. And then the other thing was our town was a dry town. There was not much to do. So you really learned how to work very hard, right? So that kind of hard work and treating others with dignity and respect was way more valuable to me in Heston, Kansas, than anything I learned at Harvard. Not that Harvard was a bad place; it was fun, but that was great. And quite frankly, my time at Washburn, I know yours too, was fantastic. I got very close to my professors, and it was a perfect environment. I actually thought I was going to go be a lawyer, and that was kind of where I thought. I went to Washburn undergrad. They had a pretty good law school and have a pretty good law school there. And I went and took a couple of law classes while I was in undergrad, and I found it to be so boring. I said, if I do that, it's like your dinner. This is going to be a really bad life. If there's any lawyers listening, I'm not against lawyers at all. It's just, it wasn't for me. And so I kind of pivoted, and instead of trying to get into Harvard Law School, I kind of in the back of my brain always wanted to go to Harvard. I'm not sure why as a kid. Little kid, my great uncle had gone to seminary there, or my uncle, I guess, had gone to seminary there. So I don't know, I had been out there once, and I always thought that would be cool. So I just pivoted from law school to business school, and got my accounting finance degree at Washburn, and that was a great path for me. And I still really appreciate the time I had at Washburn. All my in-laws are in Topeka, so I.
Yeah, I think you even have some family that works here. Maybe if I remember, you said that. So
you have some of my. I think a niece and maybe 2 nephews or something like that. Yeah,
That's cool.
It's great. I mean, you're very important to us, Cody, and your business.
I'll try not to mess it up.
Topeka too, because it's a hub of. It's a government hub essentially.
Yep.
It's the state capital, and there's not a lot of really energetic, growing. You might know more than me, but growing businesses in town. So you guys have you've taken the town by storm, and I love the development you've done. In the city, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, we're getting there. Hey, I want to ask, I don't know if I told you this. I actually came to Washburn. Well, I came for a number of reasons. One, there was a guy in my hometown who endowed a scholarship, and it was free. So that was probably the primary reason I came. But I thought I was going to be an attorney too, and the exact same thing. The first class I took, I'm like, this isn't very fun. Changed course also. So I didn't know that. You talk about, I've heard you talk about your uncle some. I think you talk about him a little bit in the book, and obviously was an incredible entrepreneur. I kind of grew up, my grandparents were entrepreneurs, not near as successful, but he was also what I would say is a social entrepreneur. You already talked about that idea of just all those, when you think about Wichita, there are just some great entrepreneurs that have been down in that area. How important was witnessing that, and as you've gone, and what I've seen you do is not only the people you surround yourself with, but then also pouring into other people. Like, did you learn that there? Did you see something in that or was it more just like kind of it was natural because you were around?
No, I think I learned a lot from my parents and from my great uncle, on that. He would tell you, like when I talked to him, he passed away at 99 in 2012. So I had him for a long time in my life.
Wow.
But if you ask him what God called him to do in life, he'd say it was to mechanize things for farmers, to make it easier for them to work. But if you ask him what God really called him to do, what his mission was, he said it was to give away all his money to the kingdom before he died. And so he actually managed, at 97, he managed to give all his money away. And if you go to Aspen, Colorado, you'll see a chapel in the middle of Aspen. And if you go inside that chapel, it's actually dedicated to my grandpa and my great uncle, who were Mennonite preachers. So he did that, but more importantly, he had a theme for all his giving, which was kind of faith at work, right? He believed if you created jobs for people, you could actually speak into their lives. And you had a platform, that was a little more powerful than just talking to people. And so he actually started the largest dairy farm or dairy operation in Latin America, and shipped a whole bunch of used dairy equipment from our area down there so he could start it. And that led him to starting MEDA, Mennonite Economic Development Association, which is globally famous for their work now in creating jobs, all over the world in countries. And so we actually have taken our family, my immediate family, myself, my kid, Rhonda, my wife, Rhonda, and my kids, and we've actually adopted that theme, Faith at Work, for the philanthropy that we do. And so we've kind of carried that legacy to the point of, did that have an impact on you? I'd say,
Yeah.
more than fundamental. Yeah. So to this day, essentially, but really admired the kind of way he approached how he treated other people and what he thought, we were all called to do, on earth.
Well, and that's becoming, more and more popular today. But even back then, like that's pretty revolutionary. You didn't see that probably quite as much.
No, you did. You really didn't.
So
yeah.
it's
People would tend to accumulate and hang on, right?
Yeah.
And
for sure.
he was of a very different mindset. He felt like he needed to. His goal. He's the only one I know, because I won't be this good. It's very hard to time it exactly right. But of saying you gave away your last dollar right as you died, that's pretty admirable, right? I mean,
that's really cool.
That's a challenge for us all. I've fallen a bit short of that myself.
I had not heard that story about that. I don't know if you've read the book about Chuck Feeney, but I think it's called The Billionaire Who Wasn't or something. And there was an article like a year ago. He finally achieved. He's about that age too, and started duty free and had this vision. Like by the time he was a billionaire, by the time he's dead, it's all gone, and he's down to like his last. Basically whatever's left to sustain him for the last few years, which is wild to me. So
what cool. A fantastic thing, though. I mean, it's incredible. I'll tell you, Bernie Marcus, who's the founder of Home Depot, and he built the Atlanta Aquarium. He's got Shepherd School for brain injury and autism in Atlanta. Has done a whole bunch of things. He's actually set up his whole. I've interviewed him on this. He's actually set up his whole. Foundation and everything, so that it's not quite when he dies, but he's given away a lot now, and by none of it survives past 10 years. So he just very thoughtfully said, I just want to give it back.
That's cool.
That's good.
Okay, I've had you on here for a long time. So you've been so generous with your time. I always like to end this with these are questions, and I've actually asked you a few of these questions when we've been together, but I always say these are questions I like to ask people when I get a chance to spend some time with them. So I've tried to group them up and ask them. You good for like 5 quick lightning round questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's kind of a new one that I've been asking lately. But what lesson, this past year with the pandemic was kind of unprecedented in a lot of ways. Is there one big lesson or takeaway that you learned in 2020 that you'll carry forward for the rest of your life or your career?
Yeah, I'd say I come back to that: absorb fear and exude hope. I really think that probably is the kind of theme of the pandemic for me. I'm vice chair of the Baylor College of Medicine board, which is the leading infectious disease place in the country. So we've actually been doing a lot of the testing for and running the entire Texas Medical Center for COVID and for the pandemic. And I think it's an evolving thing. It became way too political, but so I just kind of stand back from all that and say, look at the data and then say, how do I kind of absorb some fear and, exude some hope, as you kind of go through that with business or even with people as they kind of get so politically charged on this stuff, right?
Yeah. So you're saying look at the data and listen to medical professionals?
Yeah,
that's a novel idea, huh?
Unfortunately, this is not just personal opinion, but maybe more than personal opinion, the CDC has done such a bad job communicating on that.
Just told someone that the communication approach has been awful.
Really bad. I tell the Baylor folks all the time, the president of Baylor College of Medicine and his wife is the president of Duke's College of Medicine. I tell them all the time that the best thing that would ever happen is if Fauci would retire. I think we could hit Control-Alt-Delete, and because the data's there, the vaccine is safe and very effective. So, I mean, the data's all there, and it just became a political, kind of football. And when somebody said put on a mask, I said, we've been using masks for 250 years. I mean, it's an inanimate object. It's not a political statement. So,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know.
There is a fascinating lesson there, though, even what you talked about earlier, just being able to communicate clearly and consistently, and they've done
failed.
an awful job with that.
They got that lesson of the 3 most important words in the English language. I was actually talking to some of the folks in Washington about this. I said, if you guys would say, I don't know, like 3 times a day, because you don't know, right? What's the origin for this virus? The right answer is, I don't know, right? We don't know if it came out of an animal or a lab. We're probably never going to know.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's not that hard.
That would be good.
Yeah, would be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second, so we could talk about this one for a long time.
Exactly. I think we're all tired of it.
So a second question, what is, if you could go back and look at one thing that you've done personally that helped you graduate from being a good leader to being a great leader, what is that one thing you would say it was?
Yeah, I'd say I'm still working on the great leader part. So I'd hate to claim that mantle. It's like claiming the mantle in church of, I won the humility award and I'm going to wear a ribbon about, that's a hard one. But I think it all involves other people, right? It all involves how do you treat other people, and that whole idea that when you get to a certain, I guess, stage of your career or age, probably both, some combination of both, you really realize this is not about you. It's really about how do you have a lasting impact and use the platform that God provided you in life to try and make a difference, and that's probably the good to great on the leadership. Is when you realize this is not about me.
That's good. And this may be, I'm interested to hear how you answer this question, because you're at a phase where I see you pouring into so many other people. But what is something that you're doing this year to drive your own personal growth?
Yeah, I've got this fantastic group, Cody, of 3 other CEOs. We've been meeting now. I'm scared to say it because it seems like yesterday we started, for almost 15 years.
Wow.
And we get together once a week on Sunday morning from 6:30 to 8:30 in the morning, prior to churches and all that, church stuff. And we actually either listen to a sermon series or read a book and kind of share our thoughts on it. And then we share prayer requests, our sort of thoughts, and we get advice from each other. And that probably for me, it's not something this year necessarily, but that's something for me that every year has just been such a fundamental, having those guys there that, and as guys, we rarely do that. And I didn't do it till I was 45, I guess, but having those guys there to sort of bounce ideas off of and tell me when I'm coming off the rails, it's just been a great, it's been a great tool. And I'd encourage anybody to create that group around you. I found Rhonda, my wife, did it much easier than I did. I think women in generally do it better than men.
Yeah.
But it's just such a fundamentally important thing.
It's been interesting. It's one of the big things we try and do here with our advisors is create these environments for them to come. And we've always known it's important, but then with COVID, we didn't do any events. We didn't bring people together for almost a year. And it just probably has really kind of crystallized in our mind, just like how important that is. Like all the other stuff we do is great, but nothing is as important as that group that you're able to surround yourself with.
Yeah, I had the privilege of coming into San Antonio, I think it was, and spending time and watching that process. And for those advisors who are on who haven't attended one of those, maybe you all have, but it is fantastic. I mean, I think I'd have that on my calendar every year.
Yeah, great. Okay, so you mentioned this, and so this is a question I ask everyone, but what is the one book? It can't be your book, but what's the one book that you recommend most to other entrepreneurs or business leaders? Yeah,
I tend to focus more on theology than I do on business stuff. There's a lot of good stuff out there. I think on the business side, Vern Harnish's books on scaling up, really for the scale of businesses that most advisors is fantastic, and Vern has a lot of great tools, and I've known him for forever, back to the mid '90s. We've talked to each other. The book I just finished actually rereading with actually the group of CEOs I was talking about. A.W. Tozer has a book called Knowledge of the Holy. He's a theologian, so this is a theological book. If you're not into that kind of thing, this is not a business book, but it's a small little book, but it's just packed with kind of really interesting ways to think about the world and to kind of shape your worldview, which is a great place to start if you sort of start about thinking about philosophy and then theology, and then you kind of get to strategy and execution. I like to do the philosophy and theology piece too, to add some meaning to it. So that would be one. The other book that I'd highly recommend people read, just a very interesting book. It's a book called Same Kind of Different as Me. I think you probably read it.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's a great book.
And I think as you're thinking about how to treat other people, it's a story about, true story out of Fort Worth about a homeless man and a businessman and how their relationship developed over time. And it's a very powerful book to kind of think about relationships in your life and how do you take some preconceived notions and kind of remove them from your mind to get to a different place.
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think for those who don't like to read, I do think they made it into a movie.
It's a movie.
I think
You can watch it.
Yeah,
it is a movie.
The book's better, but it is a movie. So, yeah, I will say and I have one final question I want to ask you, but one of the things that I took from your book that I think I told you this, I implemented it last year, but you every year send a book out. You have a list of people, and I ended up sending out, I don't know, Tamara helped me, probably 120 books to people just of, hey, here's a book that was really impactful for me over this last year, and shared it and got great feedback on that. So read Greg's book if you want that idea. Okay, final question. What is the single best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think I'll give you just a couple because I'm not sure I can get it to one. Obviously the sort of pounding that I got pounded into me about treating others with dignity and respect, basically in the form of the golden rule when I was growing up, do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you. It was probably the best kind of fundamental advice to kind of sit and thought that. But I also got, Mitt Romney gave me a piece of advice, I think, Mitt, senator and kind of former presidential candidate. He was at Bain when I was at Bain. He was running Bain when I was there as a young person. And he said to me, Greg, in every interaction, you either gain share or you lose share. There's no neutral interaction. I've always found that, and that's always sat in my mind as I go into conversations and say, am I going to gain share here? Am I doing something that's actually taking this to a better spot? Or am I on the wrong spot in the mood elevator? Maybe I'm angry or depressed or frustrated, where I'm actually going to lose share in this interaction. And it's been a good sort of, mental checkpoint for me before I sit down and talk to people.
No, that's great advice. I've wrote a lot of stuff down, but yeah, that's a good one. So I also love and I think maybe I heard you say this, the absorb fear and exude hope. Yeah. I think you said that in December, just being a big, big part of that. So Greg, my friend, you have been so gracious with your time and also just delivered so much value today. As people have listened to this, if they want to try and connect with you kind of online, where can they pick the book up? And is there any other place they should follow you at all? Yeah, they can actually pick the book up at Amazon, if they want, or, they can email me, send an email, and I'll be happy to get them a copy. I got to say about social media. So when I wrote this book, everybody said, Greg, you need to set up all these social media sites. And that was the one piece of marketing I said I'm never going to do. So I maybe I hate to say it or not hate to say it, I don't know, but I'm not on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any other social media site. And I got to be honest, I don't know what you're probably better off for it.
I just haven't. I haven't wanted to take the time and the effort to sort of, I don't know, be tracked by Mark Zuckerberg. So.
Well, go pick the book up. We'll link it in the show notes too, so if people want to buy it. And there's also, I know you've done some great conversations and talks that are out there. I know I've seen one at Vern's Scaling Up event and some others that people can probably find out on.
Yeah,
YouTube
if you use Google, you'll find all that stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, my man. Thank you for this. For everyone who listens, if you enjoyed the Business of Advice podcast, specifically this, hit subscribe and make sure that you're following along. So when new episodes like this one come out, you get them. And if you would leave a review, let others know if you thought this was a valuable way for them to spend their time. Greg, thank you again for everything. Thank you for the positive impact you've had on my life over the last few years, and also the advisors that work with us.